we'll take this. Thank you for waiting. I think we'll get started. Hope everybody had a nice summer, so we have to get back to work. My name's Garth. I'm one of the leads for OWASP Ottawa. OWASP Ottawa's been kicking around from about 2006. We do monthly meetups. We're trying to, post-COVID, get back into the groove of doing workshops as well as having other things going on as well as the monthly meetups. But for how about now? All right, but it's not on the stream? All right, okay. So, see, I never did AV. Yeah, I might just have to do it from there. Oh, yeah, get rid of Microsoft, please. There we go. This QR code will not try to sell you Bitcoin. It'll be our chapter page at the OWASP site, and that will give you all the details. We've handed out some cards as well that have all our details. We're pretty much on most anti-social medias, and we're on the meetup page, and we talk on LinkedIn and Twitter and Mastodon now. Next page, please. I have to say something about becoming an OWASP member. There's a number of perks. There's discounts for a number of different tools and conferences and things like that. It also helps support this chapter in terms of some of the things we do. Next slide, please. Oh, it's actually working now? Thank you. Do you want to present? You got something interesting to talk about security? We want to hear about it. We can take it, we'll take anything from a lightning talk to a 30-minute talk to a full-up presentation. We have a site called Sessionize that will allow you to provide your abstract and all the details, or you can just talk to one of us. This is the anti-social media one. We share the slides, so it's all there, and it's also on the cards we handed out. We have a Slack, and one of the channels is about jobs. So if you've got you're looking for employees or you're looking for employment, we have a channel dedicated to that. So you can go to the self-invite thing. This can't happen without help from some of the volunteers that help put it all together and help organize and also help keep me sane most of the time. There's a couple of OWASP events coming up. There's Global AppSec in Washington, D.C. in October. And the other thing that membership goes is to support some of the open source projects. So I don't know if anybody recalls any of these names. Juice Shop is a great tool to be able to learn to test penetration testing against a modern vulnerable web app. It's done by a guy out of Hamburg, and so the original name was Saftladen, which is German for juice shop. And Saftladen is a term meaning it's a crappy shop. Defect Dojo for tracking Dojo, and this tool creeps me out. AMAS is a great open source intelligence tool, and it's one of my favorites. Oops, sorry. So now I'm going to shut up and introduce the presentation. So unless you've been living under a rock for the past 10 years, you will notice that there have been hacking, and the cyber realm has sort of transitioned to be the game of nation states. And so from the early days of Ukraine being the playground for nation states to bring down power grids, it's become a more of a political tool and a tool to affect external policy. So what's particularly interesting to me is that the Vulkan Files gives us a bit of a clue into what's going on. So our two presenters are well versed and in that realm and this particular file. So I'm looking forward to Julian and Pavle talking to us about this. Yeah, I know you're looking at me. So Julian, is a pen tester by day, and by evening, he puts on a cape and no cape, to work in helping cyber intelligence, but for the betterment of the community. And for Pavle, I'm not sure what languages he doesn't speak, but one of the interesting things here is he comes from the realm of political science. And so this is where we see that intersection between cyber and political science. So I'm going to shut up now, and I will pass the baton to Pavle and Julian. All right, so you will have to fight over that while I get it back. Okay. Yes. Do you have a screen shared yet?
No, not yet.
Yes,
Can you show me how?
All right, so this is their slide deck.
Oh, sorry, that's all right.
So we're going to present. I'm going to share screen. And we're going to try that again. Share screen. And which video do you want?
Let's screen.
So we will go Vulkan PowerPoint. There we go.
Yep. All right, it looks like we're gonna have a bit of a challenge with the microphone here today. Of course, nothing can always go perfectly. I want to thank Garth for allowing us to come speak here today on this. I know it's not the traditional OWASP talk. It's not talking too much about web applications. And I want to thank everyone for attending and everyone who's here virtually. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for showing the interest. Today we're going to be talking about Vulkan, sort of diving a little bit into who the company is, the organization, what these files were, as well as sort of the implications and the tools that we saw released into the wild. Well, not released into the wild, but were made available for us to have an understanding of from a cyber perspective, as well as, I guess, a political science perspective as well. So a short introduction about us. As Garth was saying, by day, I work sort of as a pen tester for a company called Valencia Risk here in Ottawa. It's a small consultancy firm, and I do anything from pen testing to incident response, security audits, and assessments. And by night, I work for Strike Source, where we produced this sort of article series, and we did this research and sort of work as a cyber intelligence analyst. Pavle.
Thank you, Julian. Can everyone hear me? Yes, I think you can. So we won't have to share the microphone, but as it turns out, it wouldn't be the first thing that we would share because we work together. He's kind of the technical side to my more process-oriented person in the consulting world. So my name is Pavle Bozalo. As Garth said, my background's in political science. I'm also a Russian speaker. So it was this interesting meeting of minds and meeting of worlds that created our series of articles, which we're taking in a presentation form today. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all.
So NTC Vulkan sort of found themselves in the spotlight earlier this year, back in March. And they were seen as sort of the central figure in the Kremlin's cyber warfare operations. It really highlighted what was being done in the space, how the tools were being created for the GRU and FSB specifically. And despite the intense focus on the content of the leaks by sort of the Western media, nobody really took a moment to look at who is Vulkan, what do they do, what is this organization that supposedly is creating all of these cyber warfare sort of weapons. And upon a first inspection, Vulkan really portrays itself as just any other cybersecurity consulting firm, offering standard services such as pen testing, security assessments, and risk assessments against, the NIST frameworks and ISO frameworks. The company really promotes itself as a Silicon Valley tech startup kind of attitude.
Julian was right to bring up that a lot of things were overlooked about Vulkan. First of all, its name. The full name of the organization is not Vulkan, but NTC Vulkan. And as Western news outlets were breaking it, they seemed to take the approach that it was, something like an LLC, like a legal or like a finance regulations related acronym. But NTC actually stands for Научно-технический центр, which in Russian means, roughly translated, scientific learning center. So that kind of shows us already how Vulkan wants to portray itself, and that it's kind of seeing itself as a hub of cybersecurity expertise. Now, it operates in a suburb of Moscow that is quite gray, as suburbs of Moscow tend to be. And it operates a regular IT consultancy, as Julian suggested. But beneath appearances, Vulkan is actually revealed to be an integral part in the Kremlin's cyber warfare plans. By deep digger into how they present and how they come across, we have the ability to tune into an important cog of a truly industrial operation that supplies tools and strategies for cyber warfare and disinformation around the globe, which were in play for much longer than actually the beginning of the war in Ukraine.
So here's a great example. There was a graphic assembled by some journalists, basically demonstrating this sort of appearance that they want to have. They attend conferences, they invite people in, they do lessons for the community, similar to maybe this OWASP meeting. They have events at their headquarters.
So looking at the influence of that organization as part of the Russian military-industrial complex, we felt like we couldn't really ignore the background of the founders. So the founders of Vulkan are two gentlemen by the name of Anton Markov and Alexander Irzhavsky. Both of them were graduates from the St. Petersburg Military Academy. It's one of the premier military education institutions in Russia, but being part of that circle, as anywhere on the planet really, is a game of networking. It's a game of who you know. Now, not only is it an influential institute, but St. Petersburg is actually the city where Vladimir Putin's political career was born. That is also true for most of his closest collaborators. So that really put Vulkan, or the two men rather, to be in a quite good position in 2010 after they were done serving as junior army officers to create the company in that year. So there's a few points worth noting. Firstly, Vulkan was founded by two men whose connections with the Russian military runs deep, educated in the city that saw the political birth of Vladimir Putin, as I said, and also some of his closest associates, again, as I've said. So its ties with the Russian armed forces and military-industrial complex can't really be underestimated or downplayed. And it's doubtless their background that allows them to land so many high-profile contracts, which we'll discuss shortly.
And another thing that we noticed when we went and did our initial dig into the reporting on this, we started a couple months afterwards, after the initial leaks and everyone had sort of put out their articles. So we had a little time to look at the aftermath of things. And one thing that we noticed in the articles was many people suggested that the sort of relationship between Vulkan and GRU had started in 2013. And after talking to a source that we had that was very familiar with the files, he wasn't sure where that number came from. So we went on to another sort of dig. And what we had found was that, interestingly, Vulkan's inception aligns with the initiation of APT-29, also known as Cozy Bear's use of the Mini Duke malware. So in 2010, there was this Mini Duke campaign that was later attributed to Vulkan. Vulkan wasn't a new player it was sort of known, but not to this extent. So we sort of were able to peg down that relationship starting in 2010, soon after they received a special state license, which we'll get into a bit later. The firm, as soon as they had launched, had gotten that license, and they just sort of they rose to prominence within the Russian cybersecurity space, and they got they amassed a long list of clientele, and it was a testament to Markov's and Erzhovsky's sort of connections within the community by how quickly the company was able to grow. So the Vulkan Files. The Vulkan Files were in total about 5,000 documents that spanned from 2016 to 2021. And it granted us this never-before-seen perspective into the deep recesses of Russian cyber warfare. They included a ton of content, from technical documentation, as you can see, to emails and specification sheets. Pavle and I had the chance to look at some of them, about 800, and I'd say the vast majority of them were quite boring, unfortunately. But what stood out is the diverse and sort of adaptable nature of the collection of weapons that had been sort of divulged. They had the capabilities to facilitate sort of the systemic exploitation of vulnerabilities worldwide, set up misinformation campaigns, and perform mass OSINT. One of the most noteworthy revelations was sort of the ability to manipulate social media with tools on a mass scale, to set up hundreds of accounts and control them from a single sort of computer, and to remain anonymous while doing so. And we'll get more into that as we go along.
So as we got acquainted with the contents of the file, we really saw that this was no joke. We saw the dark side of Russia's military and espionage capacities taken online. So the documents bring up Vulkan's association with infamous threat actors like Sandworm, known for some of the most high-profile cybersecurity exploits in the last few years. The wealth of information that we found in these documents highlights how complex and sophisticated strategies are interwoven to cause harm and really cast a dark shadow on the future of cybersecurity. Now, there is one main question, which is that of their authenticity. So private military contractors and intelligence agencies have had their information leaked beforehand. remember Vault 7. And there's always questions about, okay, how authentical it is, how much can we trust it? Well, the verdict for the Vulkan Files is pretty clear. It's been looked at by a variety of independent researchers affiliated with high-profile cybersecurity firms, and researchers from 5 top national intelligence agencies, and it was validated as legitimate. The deployment of tactics that were detailed in those files, some of which we looked at, others that we got an account of, could really wreak havoc on global societies, especially as the world is more connected nowadays, which really emphasizes the need for stronger and more resilient global cybersecurity infrastructures and additional transparency and vigilance in the digital domain.
So we highlighted how NTC Vulkan sort of maintained this veneer of sorts. They're just sort of another player in the crowded landscape of Russian cybersecurity consultancies, and they offer the certainly standard services akin to what Deloitte or maybe KPMG would. And they also boast a surprisingly high level of clientele, both top-tier domestic and international entities. An important facet of their client base is the substantial involvement with major Russian banking entities, such as Sberbank and the Moscow Stock Exchange. Not stopping at financial institutions, Vulkan also provided services to vital infrastructure and energy corporations with major ties to the Kremlin, such as Lukoil and Gazprom. Moreover, their portfolio featured significant telecom firms like the Sberbank's telecom subsidiary Rostelecom, a detail to remember as we go forward in the presentation.
Doing a little bit more research, what adds more to the mystique and frankly to the concern among in Vulkan's portfolio is the frankly numerous number of high-profile Western clients that they've had. That runs the gamut from the Peugeot Citroën Bank in France, the Toyota Financial Services, as the name suggests, from Japan, and even reaches the aerospace sector in the case of Boeing, who apparently hired Vulkan for cybersecurity consultancies. Now, of course, we can only guess the extent to which they engaged with those entities, what services were paid for, but one can deduce their nature based on the menu of offerings from Vulkan's website. Now, I'd like you to imagine just for a second being a Western organization that has engaged Vulkan for cybersecurity assessments. What we've seen trickling down since the leaks in March could indeed be a cause for heightened concern. Vulkan is effectively an outsourced body of the GRU, Russia's military intelligence organization, which is concerning, to put it mildly. So the context of these leaks sort of highlights the importance to situate them in time and space. Now, before the war in Ukraine, even before the taking of Crimea, piracy in Russia, fairly widespread thing. Most of the population actually engaged in the unauthorized downloading of music, films, games, enjoyment of private property for which they did not, pay, whether it's due to economic reasons or personal preference. But in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the country got the dubious honor of becoming the most sanctioned country on earth, surpassing Iran. So in a strategic move, the Putin administration effectively decided to capitalize on this predisposition to piracy and pretty much giving their okay for their citizens to do that. So that brings us to an interesting question and a concerning question, really. What are the implications of these factors arising from Vulkan's privileged access to the infrastructural details of several of these high-profile Western companies that we've mentioned a slide ago? The amassed data from audits, penetration tests, other cybersecurity assessments that may have been conducted on their behalf could be a goldmine of information. With the tacit approval from the Kremlin to indulge in intellectual property theft, Vulkan, and really by extension the GRU, are in a prime position to harvest privileged information that they may have had access to.
And this creates sort of an unprecedented situation whereby Western titans of industry like Boeing and the Citron Bank sort of trusted Vulkan with their cybersecurity assessments, could see their secrets laid out for the GRU to be able to access them for espionage reasons or to cause damage and destruction in order to sort of hurt the West.
So when we were putting the articles together, both of these gentlemen were unknown, but now the gentleman on the top, as I understand, he's no longer among us, but now, he is better known as well. What this kind of brings into shadow is the division, or brings into light, sorry, is the contrast between symmetrical and asymmetrical warfare, and the fact that Russia is leaning into asymmetrical warfare and grooming more and more people to play that role in its wars. When you think of symmetrical warfare, you think of two armies going head to head. Okay, there is such a thing as wartime, everyone can describe it. Okay. Asymmetrical warfare can't really be described that way. And cybersecurity is the ideal environment for asymmetrical warfare because you could be sitting on information that you've gotten for years and strike at the appropriate moment when your adversary or your target is weakest. The difference between these two gentlemen is that this man perfectly embodied symmetrical warfare. Before his actions over the past few months and before his passing, I thought he was only known that people who spent too much time on Telegram like me, but he's become more famous since then, and he'd be screaming, he's all bluster, constantly cussing out the generals for their supported misgivings on the war. But this gentleman above, or below, his name is Evgeny Serebryakov. You don't know him, and a lot of people indeed don't know him. He could very well be taking the metro in Moscow or St. Petersburg, and no one would be the wiser. He doesn't really look like some sort of, James Bond type, or like he's not very famous. In fact, that's the best picture of him we could find online. He was caught a few years back in the Benelux countries, I believe it was Belgium.
Or the Netherlands, yeah.
Yeah, Belgium or the Netherlands, for spying. He was sentenced to jail. And even with that black mark on his dossier, when he came back to Russia, they made him the new head within the GRU of the Sandworm faction. That would really illustrate to me, and that really illustrated to us, how Russia is treating symmetrical and asymmetrical warfare. Symmetrical, you step out of line, you get taken out when you're expendable. Asymmetrical, too worthy to throw away. So Project Amazit is a project spearheaded by Vulkan to create strong and complex instruments of cyber warfare. So Amazit can do several things. It can compromise telecommunications apparatuses, orchestrate internet traffic, forge fake social media accounts and profiles, and circulate false information. So the complex subsystems making up Amazit also administer a variety of interventions on the digital traffic. That runs the gamut from interception and alteration, redirection and analysis, to outright preventing the usage of Tor or VPNs on select users. Now, alongside this, the revelations in the Vulkan Files shed light on Crystal 2V. So that's Vulkan's confidential initiative designed not only to train the next generation of hackers in Russia, but also to test the tools that it develops.
The leaks also brought to sort of the forefront a tool called Scan. And I believe it was identified that Scan is a tool that was intended to be used by Sandworm. And we'll get into that a little bit more. But essentially, Scan was a sophisticated tool in order that did mass data collection and looking for vulnerabilities on the web. So let's take a closer look at Amazet. So Amazet can be best described as a complex tool to infiltrate telecommunications infrastructure, eavesdrop on communications, and follow the internet activities of designated targets. It has the potential to create fake social media accounts and establish a network of sort of artificial accounts used to spread misinformation. It's an expansive system, and the primary subsystem was designed to intercept, halt, and alter traffic navigating through telecom devices such as switches and routers. And once infiltrated, it offered the capacity to steer network currents or incapacitate them with straightforward configuration adjustments. Once it was sort of redirected into the subsystems, you were able to dissect the protocols and modify data in transit, identify people who were using Tor, stop people from using Tor, or even redirect them to sort of a watering hole attack, so a web page that you controlled so you could gain access to their credentials.
So beyond its ability to analyze information and carry out attacks, Amazet really was an important tool in the spread of Russian misinformation endeavors. The way that it works is that it identifies high-impact social media entities and exploits various communication mediums, which includes SMS, online forums, and social media platforms to share narratives that are aligned with Russian geostrategic objectives. Amazet has, again, it's very sophisticated. It's got a propaganda generation module with utilities for manipulation of video, audio, imagery, which set the stage for much more versatile and much more sophisticated misinformation dissemination platform in the future.
Yeah, and so this tool drew on Vulkan's knowledge of telecommunications providers. As we said earlier, these telecommunications providers were their common customers, Rostelecom and such. So of course they knew how to build a system to infiltrate and intercept data that was used by these providers. And it catered precisely to the demands of their clientele, the GRU and the FSB. And what had been reported on in sort of the perspective that journalists had taken on this was, okay, well, you'd have to have physical access to the network. You'd have to, break into Rostelecom and plug in a computer. But they didn't take into sort of consideration that the GRU and the FSB have direct access at all times to these agencies and to these companies. They innately have this access. It was also identified that Amazet was most likely used in 2017 during Armenia's parliamentary elections, and it was a period that was marred with misinformation campaigns, including fabricated assertions of US election interference. The tool is also equipped with the capability to mask the identity of the user. So it can do that through Tor, of course, VPNs, and implementing botnets into its sort of usage. I think I can best describe Amazet as sort of a metasploit for misinformation. It has all these different modules, it has all these different capabilities, and I think we could probably spend an hour and a half talking just about that.
So Scan emerged as a sophisticated tool that offered an ability to do a deep dive into cyber warfare methodologies. So Scan is also an advanced and highly sophisticated software that's created to constantly scrutinize the internet landscape, identify system vulnerabilities, and amass an extensive repository of potential breach points for the GRU's coming cyber offensive missions.
SCAN was essentially this tool that allowed the GRU to collect mass data on all the endpoints on the internet, rate systems, see which ones they want to use for their next attack, whatever their motivation may be. So you can picture in your head having a map of all the Canadian internet locations, their vulnerabilities, and what may be most prime for an attack. It essentially allowed them to capitalize on closed source intelligence acquisition methods, as well as open source intelligence gathering methods, and put this all together to be able to direct attacks sort of in cyber warfare.
So in 2018, as I suggested previously, Vulkan got a commission from the Russian government to create what became known as the Crystal 2V Training Initiative, which is a comprehensive program that facilitates concurrent training sessions, which can contain up to 30 participants. They're effectively being groomed to be the next wave of cyber warriors.
So our source that was acquainted with the documents revealed that another thing that hadn't been covered was there was actually seeding plans for the Crystal 2V program. Not only was Vulkan creating software for the GRU and FSB to use, but they were also going to give instruction on how to, conduct it and do the training. Much like the people sitting in this room right now, they'd all be sat at Vulkan headquarters and using the Crystal 2V training program. He also said the training reflects what he would use as sort of a preparatory stage before a full-fledged invasion. And keep in mind, this was something that was created in 2018. So they were prepping and at least had some indication that they may have wanted to invade Ukraine or invade another sort of foe. It was also a modular tool. So it used a lot of different softwares from different vendors. So I'm not sure the specifics, but it relied upon essentially buying licenses from other countries and such. And one of the documents he had seen was a risk assessment performed on their supply chains to see which software vendors, if there were an invasion and sanctions, would follow those sanctions and which ones wouldn't care. Now, this was, I believe, a document in 2021, early in the year. There was also emails within sort of these documents that said to the teams that were building Crystal 2V to talk with the team that had built Amazet and to make sure that you didn't duplicate efforts. So Crystal 2V was used as a training ground essentially for Amazet to teach people how to build disinformation campaigns and how to use the Amazet tool. And so here is sort of a timeline of events, and I know it's a little hard to see, I'm sure for especially the people in the back, but we can see the 2010 launch of Vulkan and the first contact with GRU and the creation of Miniduke, the 2014 invasion of Crimea, the contract proposal to purchase Amazet B, or to get Amazet B built. And then 2018, SCAN was designed and approved. And the 2019 SCAN prototype was created, and Crystal 2V contract was sort of initiated. So where do we go from here? What does this all mean for us, especially as people who work in cybersecurity or who may be wanting to work in cybersecurity? Well, the revelations from the Vulkan leak, I think, really illuminate the escalating challenges that we face in the cybersecurity community. How are we supposed to fight against these complex disinformation type tools, vulnerability collection tools, and advanced hacking tools? It can be very grim at sometimes. But it bears testimony to sort of the level of threat and gives us an understanding of sort of the enemy that we're facing on a daily basis.
What the Vulkan Files tell us is that there's a need to call back to the urgency for a fortified cybersecurity blueprint. What we're seeing is that cyber warfare is much more than just a slogan. This is some of the sharpest, most state-of-the-art tools in the trade. This is coordinated and this is organized. And this is just coming from what has been leaked. There's a much more that has not been leaked. And with every day that passes, as we've seen, as I'm sure you're acquainted with as well, hackers are finding ways to become more sophisticated, lighter on their feet. We're going to see more and more of that coming from all parts of the world. It's not just Russia. It's not just China. It's not just India. It's going to be smaller countries as well. We're seeing that hostile states are effectively integrating cyber warfare as part of their military arsenal. They're training the next generation of hackers, and cyber warfare and misinformation go hand in hand. To successfully be able to repel those onslaught is going to take, I think Julian would agree, truly a cyber revolution. Working towards a secure online world needs a concerted and holistic global effort. Not seeing cybersecurity as one of the fronts on which the wars of the future will be fought is a mistake. And it's a mistake that could cost not only states, not only geopolitical ambitions, but us, people, citizens. It could cost us dearly. Critical infrastructure is actively being targeted. Staying the course on bolstering cybersecurity becomes an urgent call of duty for all international actors, from countries to international organizations to NGOs, civil society, etc., needing constant and repeated efforts to make sure our societal framework remain valid, resilient, and strong in this digitally transformed age.
So if you were to start a massive disinformation campaign, like for dummies, how would you start it using the tools that you mentioned?
I probably wouldn't, because I wouldn't want to do that. But yeah, if I were to start a massive disinformation campaign with the tools, probably on Facebook. It seems to be the hot spot for it. Maybe LinkedIn to be a little exciting.
So how would you compare Vulkan with things like various organizations in Washington, D.C. that do similar things for the NSA? Is it the same but in Russian, or is one more advanced? How would you compare it?
I think comparing this to what's done in Washington is a good example. We have to be realistic that we're probably doing something similar as they are. But this is the first glance that we're getting to see to what extent is it being done. I think with the commercialization of spyware and sort of the opening of that door, we're going to continue to see leaks like this every year and getting an idea of what's really going on behind closed doors. And as Pavle was saying, this sort of comes back to the call for more open discussions between governments around what is okay, what isn't. I know I had recently reported on sort of the idea of whether or not attacking critical infrastructure should be considered a war crime. And now the ICC is considering that.
It agrees, yeah.
Yeah. So it's things like that that help us move into a better direction of recognizing some things are off limits. And trying to figure out how can we collectively combat, these misinformation campaigns or these highly effective tools to attack critical infrastructure.
If I can just add something, I agree with Julian. This is international relations. It's not, it's diplomacy, it's politics. It's not a tea party. There's no such thing as goodbyes or good guys, bad guys, no matter what some might be trying to tell you. What is really of concern to me, and that's the reason for which I brought up civil society, is that by developing these tools, sure, they may one-up, DDoS attacks, you piss off a country one day, it's like your regional rival, okay. But what it's doing is it's opening another front in wartime, the cyber front, literally this one. The battlefield is this. And that's really what is of concern in that case.
Was in this case of just the mutually self-assured construction issue that we were called for, right? They're just responding to what NSA power and doing, right? With the shadow broker.
Well, you can.
Ruling from NSA, look at the Pegasus controversy from
NSO, yeah.
versus West once again.
Yeah, of course, and it is. Yeah, and again, this is where we have to decide what are we going to say is off limits. Should there be something that should be off limits? In my opinion, there should be. Critical infrastructure, hospitals, things like that should probably be off limits. Am I just a cyber optimist per se? Yes, I would say so. But it takes having these conversations to be able to move that needle forward to that direction.
We all stand on high pedestal, but it's America that dropped the first bomb. It's also America that kicked off Sandra. That's the official first known national cyber attack, right? So we speak a lot, but not to defend what they're doing, but you also have the right to defend yourself, right? And we're not really acting as great neighbors here.
For sure. I think Stuxnet, not Sandworm. Yeah.
That was it. So if the misinformation is mostly through social media, and this is the political angle here, companies are not going to enforce things on their own, as has been shown multiple times. What should governments be doing to make sure that, James 63947 isn't trying to tell me to take horse antivirals for fighting a pandemic?
It's you've asked a simple question, you've asked an interesting question, but one that's very difficult to answer, especially in our day and age where there is, how should we say this, permeability between the public and the higher echelons of the private sector. In the past few decades, as the world became more connected, we saw the rise of surveillance capitalism. I honestly don't know what to tell you. I like to be hopeful, but if there's no way to rein them in, if there's no way to either, offer incentives or be punitive in some way, I can't be definitive.
Continue
in my answer.
naming and shaming, I guess.
Well, that doesn't work. That just means
It does.
But the GDPR, is that making a dent in things? Because in terms of privacy legislation,
Yeah.
It seems to be, I don't know, maybe I am being a bit pessimistic on that one, but it seems to be a cost of doing business for at least Meta.
Yeah, so the joke is actually with the cyber optimist. It's our company's tagline. So, now I was chuckling. Now you can chuckle as well. But the GDPR, well, for privacy, yes. I'm just concerned that, again, it doesn't, we need more, and that it's becoming increasingly seen as the price of being business with these companies that are so big that they can pay fines in the hundreds of millions, really. Yeah.
all eyes on the Google lawsuit going on in the States.
Yep.
Not lawsuit, but litigation. Cool.
So if Russia has the ability to do disinformation campaigns and infrastructure and stuff like that, what does that look like in a country like the United States where they already do their own disinformation campaigns on themselves and neglect their own infrastructure? Like, how does that play out? I guess, what would Russia's incentive be there?
Well, we've already seen over the past couple of years the identification of Russian disinformation campaigns being used on the US to sow political discourse and to sort of shape narratives in their way. I think it's just a matter of whose farm is bigger and who's paying more. But I think the disinformation thing is something we can go down the rabbit hole of for hours, and the implication of that on our society and what sort of the decisions we make on a daily basis because of that. And I wish I had the time to do that today, and I certainly will at some point. But yeah, I think it's just a matter of who's spending more money on it. Yeah, well, they were their clients. So they would have been doing everything from penetration tests to security assessments to audits. And if you've ever been engaged in any of those, you can find a whole lot of information. And then, of course, with the piracy law changes and the connections to the GRU and the FSB, you can put two and two together as to what that may mean for that data that they did hold. I don't know. We'll have to see.
So did they do any work for telecoms in the West?
No, there wasn't any indication of that. And it seemed many of the Western companies that they did work with were companies that were located in Europe or headquarters in Europe, like Cintran Bank. And the Boeing example, I believe, was sort of their location in Russia. Thank you.
Thank you.